Yeah, there is a lot of problems with their stuff. Now there is, to add one feather to their cap, there is I'm using air quotes here, senior engineer who said he was part of the Soviet space program, and in 2001 he confirmed that the brothers' recordings were real.
All of them?
I don't know which ones. It never says which ones specifically, but says that they actually caught stuff that was right.
Who was this guy?
He was a senior engineer.
Ah, one of those guys. Huh?
One of those guys.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
And then let's just talk about these the moon landing attempts that were supposed to have happened. Well, there was a rocket test that did explode on a launch pad that does line up with the supposed summer of 1969 loss of somebody in a capsule. Okay, that actually is, except it was an unmanned capsule. The other one that I talked about, which is Ivan Istanovich and his dog Cloca. That seems really, really good until you look at the fact that the rocket could take a small payload with it, but nothing big enough to hold the weight of a man and a dog and a life support system.
Yeah, they maybe could have put a small dog in there.
Maybe, but there was no way that they could have done it. And, oh, wait, it turns out the whole thing was a fraud.
Yeah.
There was an artist, I can't remember what kind of art exhibit she called it, but her name is Joan Fontcuberta, and she made this art exhibit, and she faked all kinds of documentation that from the outside looks believable. So, of course, the press ran with it.
Of course.
Yeah.
Until you actually started reading it and you knew what you were talking about, and then you discovered that it was utter and complete garbage.
Yeah,
It was full of holes. It was wrong.
And what year was that she did her thing?
1969.
Yeah, there was actually some falsification going on before then, too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this one of the guy and his dog going to space and missing, that's totally bogus.
Well, that's good. I would have felt bad for the dog.
And finally, the last thing I want to talk about is the actual theories.
Yay.
Yeah.
Because we have gone through all of the history, we should finally talk about the theories, which are very easy.
It's either yes or no. It's just kind of a binary thing here.
Totally
Yeah.
is a binary theory section. Okay, so our theories are yes, it's real, and as we've talked about, was some weird stuff with the Soviet space program and how they scrub people out of the history books, and it's entirely possible that there are people who we don't know about because whoever was supposed to remove them did such a good job that they scrubbed them out of everything, and we just don't know.
Yeah.
And they could be as simple as, having died in a simple training accident.
Sure. And,
But we won't know.
Or got drunk and fought someone.
Yeah. Yeah, and you can see where there'd be, because rockets were kind of unreliable in those days, and frankly, they still are kind of sometimes. They're more reliable than they used to be, but
But they still go wonky.
yeah, so you think they want to keep the whole thing secret, and then
Well, I think in the
cover up their mistakes.
late 50s, early 60s, they had a 50% success rate.
Something like that.
Yeah, so, that wasn't exactly a job that I would want. Well, flip a coin. You're going to live or you're going to die.
Yeah.
I don't want to do that every day.
Well, think about it. When you think about the like Apollo 11, the first moon mission. Okay, you can die on the launch, or you can wind up, some mishap happens like with Apollo 13, and you all like suffocate and die from the cold on the way to the moon. Number 3, then you got to land on the moon. You got to get in orbit around the moon and land on the moon successfully without crashing.
Yep.
And then,
And I played that game, Moonlander. It's harder than you think.
yeah, I know. And then when you get back into your moon lander to take off, you better pray. You don't know for a certainty that rocket's going to fire off and get you off the surface of the moon and back to your craft.
And then you got to get that craft back to Earth.
You got to get that craft to the capsule that's orbiting above, and then made up with that, and then get it back there. So those guys, the whole way along, that's just amazing that in most of those missions, nothing really went wrong.
For the most part.
And I'm gonna say a thing that you see on the internet a lot, but it's also amazing that I carry a computer that's smarter than that in my pocket every day, right? Like my phone, your phones, where they're all smarter than any of the computers that did all of that stuff for the astronauts And it was mostly the astronauts that did that stuff, and it's just...
I've actually talked to a guy who
incredible.
worked at NASA in the 60s, and it was the old card-based system.
Yep.
You know, you had the punch cards, and that's how the computer worked. But I don't know how they did this, but he told this great story of it didn't matter what sequence you put them into the computer in, because, you know, you put a bunch of cards in at once, because somehow they had set it up because people had accidents and they would drop all of their stuff on the ground and, you know, the whole thing would be mixed up. That didn't matter. Well, you put it in and somehow it self-sequenced it, which was amazing to me. He tried to explain it, and he was talking to somebody else, and
you're like, you're a NASA scientist. I literally have no idea what you're saying.
I was, you know, I was eavesdropping, and I was like, I can't go there. I don't know what's going on. But
pretty clever.
Yeah, it was absolutely amazingly interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible to think about the amount of sophistication that was involved.
No, and
the chance. So I don't like thinking about it.
Yeah, I know.
Well, here's the thing, though, is that the maybe this is true side of the theories is, besides the censorship, the Soviet Union did some weird stuff that was outright lies. That was kind of, I didn't understand why they did it, except for somebody decided they had to. Here's what I'm talking about, which is
they sort of covered up the whole ejection thing.
Well, yeah, because, you know, I mean, there's a conspiracy theory out there that we're not getting into, which is that Gagarin never actually went into space. Like, we're ignoring that.
Same with the we never went to the moon.
Yes, we're ignoring that. But there is a group that, in English, the name is the International Air Sports Federation, and they would record records for flights. Well, their guidelines to be a successful space flight was that the person had to be in their craft when it left the Earth, went into space, and be in it when it landed on Earth, because they're dealing with airplanes. And if a guy bails out of an airplane, that means something went wrong with it. Whereas the rocket program the space program worked differently. But the point is, the Soviets just said, oh yeah, no, he totally landed. He totally landed in his capsule. So it totally counts. And they got the record. It wasn't until 6 months later when the next guy went up, whose name that I have suddenly forgot went up.
He was German Titov.
Titov, yes.
German Titov.
Titov. Well, when Titov went up, he made no bones about the fact that he had jumped.
Yeah.
He was just, no, I totally jumped out of that thing, man. There's no way.
Yeah.
So that's a weird thing, and they did it one or two times with the AIF to get records, and it was really for longest space travel. I think is what was his name again?
Titov.
Titov.
Yeah, because he went around 16 times. I think.
So he got the record of longest man in space, and they did the same thing with him, except he was like, nope, it's a total lie, but whatever, I don't care, you're paying me. This is my favorite part of the It's True, though, is that one of the sources that you will be given to prove that this whole thing is real is our good friend Fidel Castro.
Yeah, the most reliable of sources.
Yes, because in 1980, there's a gentleman by the name of Arnaldo Mendez. He was the first Cuban to go into space. He went into space aboard the Soyuz 38. That year, Castro gives a speech where he's talking about the joys of, their friend, the Soviet Union, and the fact that he had gone to Gagarin's office, which was still maintained, and then he had also been taken to another room that was called the Hall of Martyrs for all of the people who died in the space program trying to get into space.
Yeah.
Except that I did a little digging, and I found that speech, and I pulled it up, and Castro says none of that.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, but that was actually shoehorned in. But you will see that reference.
When does that ever happen?
Never.
Okay, so we're going to move on to the other half of our binary theory, which is no.
No, okay.
Didn't really happen. And I'll be honest, I fall on that side of the theories. I think everybody's listened to us for the last hour or whatever it is knows that's where I'm at. Here's my reason for it. The Soviet Union announced Gagarin's flight and imminent landing on Earth 30 minutes before he touched down.
You mean imminent landing?
What did I say?
Eminent.
Yeah, eminent, potato,
Okay,
patata.
all right.
Yeah, I don't know words, so come on, guys. I'm here for my good looks.
Yeah. That's it. You've been skating by
My
enough
shiny
years.
bald head.
Those aren't going to hold up forever.
Yeah, well, we'll see what happens. Anyway, they announced his flight 30 minutes before he's going to land. Okay, now if they'd done all these other attempts where they had gotten people into space and then
they
it
augured in.
screwed up,
Yeah.
why did they choose this particular flight to announce before it had successfully come down?
Well, exactly. I mean, because they had plenty of successes, Gagarin and afterwards. And
Yeah,
so, and
but
so
the
this is
guys
like,
who died before and these, I mean, like,
Yeah.
what
And-
up? What's up with that, guys?
Yeah,
That
and
doesn't make
almost-
sense.
Yeah, in the case of Gagarin, probably what happened with the whole newspaper story, the Daily Worker, is what they did is the Soviets, and they had the pattern from the beginning of Vostok, and Gagarin was Vostok 1.
Yes.
They would leak official word of maybe a week or two ahead of the actual launch. They would leak something. And so probably what they published was the sort of leaked announcement of Gagarin's launching. And then, of course, the official announcement was after the launch. Then they would officially announce it. They repeated that pattern again several months later when they launched German Titov into orbit. It was July 29th, 1961. A source in Moscow reported the next manned flight would be taking place in a couple of weeks, or within a couple of weeks, and that it would be a much longer flight. And then a week later, Titov was launched into space. They officially announced it. He orbited the Earth 16 times and then came down. And so that was the pattern all the way throughout their entire program. And obviously, they waited to announce it until after the launch because rockets do blow up. So that's why they waited to announce it. So if you want to believe in this whole thing, what you have to believe is that there was a successful public program which was announced ahead of time, and in parallel with it, at roughly the same time, there was a big fail program which was secret where everybody died. Yeah, that's what you
It's
have to
almost
believe.
as if they had like 3 launches at a time planned.
Yeah.
So if one blew up, they just launched the next, and then if that blew up, they'd launch the next.
Yeah.
So they had a 1 in 3 chance of getting a successful thing
I
report.
guess, to be honest, that like brings me a little comfort because my whole big thing with my problem with thinking about people lost in space, which is why I've been so quiet this episode, is because I always think like, well, there's nothing we could do. Maybe the Russians actually just have like 20 rockets at any given time where they're like, that one blew up, great, let's do this one next.
Yeah.
So maybe this fear is totally unfounded. Maybe they're always ready to just like throw somebody into space real quick.
Yeah, wow.
That's comforting somehow.
Yeah.
I don't know why, but it is.
You're so weird
I know,
sometimes,
I
but I'll
know.
run with it.
It's I don't know.
I'll take it.
Yeah, I don't think so, but anyway.
I agree. Yeah.
I'm gonna put the final nail in the coffin of this thing. Okay, so in July 1962, a guy named Frank Edwards published an article in Fate magazine called "Those Lost Soviet Astronauts." And prior to this, in the Vostok program, the Soviets actually had put a woman in space.
Yes, they had.
They had a feeling. One of the assertions he made in the article, and he made a lot of assertions in the article, was that she was not the first woman in space. She was only the first woman who survived. Yeah, he talked a lot, and so I think that's where Maria, what's her name, that you said you'd never found any other reference to anywhere. I think that's probably where she came from. It's a Frank Edwards article. He wrote a lot of stuff about, I haven't actually seen this article. I wasn't able to find it. I read a long takedown of it somewhere else on the internet by a guy that was writing about it back in the mid-'70s. He said that Edwards misspelled every Russian name. He quoted non-existent sources. He jumbled up the names of the cosmonauts and the launch dates. He also talked a lot about a September 1960 event that involved a Russian test pilot named Pyotr Dolgov, who was, quote, tracked for 20 minutes by stations in Turkey, Japan, Sweden, England, and Italy, unquote. But none of those stations actually ever tracked him, like we talked about earlier. The Italian brothers,
Yeah.
You know, they track these things, and nobody else reported actually hearing anything about that from any of these spacecraft. The head of the Jodrell Bank listening station in Britain, the head of that in 1963, wrote that there's no reason to believe that there have been any unsuccessful manned space attempts by the USSR. And of course, that was prior to 1967, but still, they had a good record up until 1963 at least. Anyway, a lot of this stuff made its way into the mainstream media.
From this particular guy?
From this particular article. The article itself actually attracted a lot of attention. And see, the Washington Evening Star in 1962 and May 63, the New York Journal American. A lot of these are papers that don't seem to exist anymore. Baltimore Sun and some others. And it's another reason not to believe everything you read in the papers. But Frank Edwards, do you recognize that name?
Yeah.
I should, and I don't remember why.
Yeah. So he's the guy that created the Anjikuni Lake mystery. He is the guy.
Yeah.
He took a 1930s article by Emmett Kelleher. Decades later, he spun it into a big elaborate story. In the original article,
it was like a half dozen tents or something?
About 5 to 6 Indian tents, and the camp was deserted, and it was all mysterious and kind of creepy.
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah, that was it though. It's just a little campsite, basically.
So he did something to do.
Frank Edwards in the '60s published a book called Stranger Than Fiction, I think it was called.
Yeah.
And he pumped it way up, and now the Indian village in Anjikuni Lake was dozens of wooden huts.
Yeah, we did an episode on it.
Yeah, we did do an episode.
Yeah, so he did some.
He evidently, from what Joe found, I didn't find this source, but Joe found that he did also may be responsible for part of this story too.
I think it's probably 90% Frank Edwards created this whole thing out of whole cloth, just like he did Anjikuni Lake.
Well, and you bring up a good point, is that if others had heard this stuff that was going on, if it was the Russian failures, the Americans, us as the Americans, we had a big reason to let the world know that the Soviets were screwing up. Why would we conceal it if we had heard it?
Absolutely.
And that's one of the things that gets pointed out is, well, it's Cold War. We wanted to put as much egg on their face as we could.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose you could argue that maybe it was some sort of a CIA black op, and that they actually put out these BS rumors and everything to try to make the Soviets
look
bad.
Look bad. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible. Maybe
not the worst idea.
Or maybe Frank Edwards was a CIA agent, or maybe they paid him some money to.
He was a good spin doctor.
But I think again that whenever you're looking into an unsolved mystery and you hear the name Frank Edwards,
just run.
You've got your answer.
Yeah,
you got your answer.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you guys have any? I'm out of stuff here, and I know we've gone over this pretty extensively. You have anything else?
No, that's it. Just if you haven't listened to our Anjikuni Lake episode, I'm sorry I spoiled it for you.
Yeah.
Way to go, Joe, pitching your own story. Well, you can find this episode as well as the Anjikuni Lake episode, as well as all of our episodes and some of the research for every story on our website. The website is going to be thinkingsidewayspodcast.com. You can download and stream from there. I know a lot of people get their episodes from different streaming apps, and we're on just about all of them. Or people will still, and a lot of people still get it from iTunes.
Yep.
If you're on iTunes, do leave a comment and a rating. We prefer the positive, but go ahead and leave a comment and a rating.
If you have something negative to say, email us.
Yeah.
So we can talk about it.
Because usually they're very episode-specific complaints, and I think that we can probably talk through some of that.
Or like the sound quality of the old episodes is really bad. We know.
I hate
we already
that
know that.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. We apologize.
We are, of course, on social media. So we are on the Twitter. We are Thinking Sideways on Twitter.
Are we on the Facebook also?
We're on the Facebook, the Fastbook. We have a Fastbook page and a Fastbook group, and we have lots of people who talk to us on that thing. So you can totally find us there. What is Joe's? Find us, friend us, like us?
Yeah. Lots. More than once.
Lots and lots and lots. Oh, I always forget. We have a subreddit, which, what is it, Dylan?
It's just Thinking Sideways.
Is it just Thinking Sideways?
Sideways?
Okay.
Yeah. And it's pretty dead right now.
Quiet.
So if you're a Reddit user, if you're one of those like hundreds of people who have managed to find us through like the Unresolved Mysteries subreddit or anything like that, just join that one too. It could be fun. You never know.
Yeah.
We're trying to do some. People are trying
Every
to
avenue,
engage.
we're trying.
You know, why not?
The main form of direct communication with us, of course, would be email. That's the
The
main
double-edged
way.
sword of our lives.
Yes, the thing
us
that we get
busy.
the most of. You are more than welcome to send us an email at thinkingsidewayspodcast@gmail.com. Episode suggestions, conversations, questions or concerns or corrections, send it all to us. We'll answer it all. Might take us a day or 3, 4, 5.
Yeah.
But we will answer
We get a
you.
lot of them. I'm sorry, you guys.
We do our best.
There's
We
just
will
3 of us,
answer
and
them.
we have jobs.
We're gonna get an
Yes.
intern one of these days.
Someday.
Your cats don't count, Joe.
No.
Yeah.
And last but not least, Patreon.
Yeah.
We are on Patreon, so you can find us at patreon.com/thinking sideways. So if you would like to financially contribute to the show, you're more than welcome to. It's absolutely not a requirement, totally a voluntary
Yep,
thing.
absolutely
but
fair.
we do appreciate that. Helps us out a lot.
Yeah.
If you pledge $1 million an episode, of course, you can tell
You
us.
own us.
Yeah, you own us. Yeah.
I'm willing to be owned for that much.
Yeah.
too.
Hell yeah.
I'm cheap.
Easily, yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, that's all I've got. So we will talk to everybody next week.
Yep. So long, folks.
Hey, did you guys know that when astronauts who have like been on the space station for a really long time, when they come back, they often forget that gravity exists?
They do.
Really?
Because when you're in the space station, you can just like let something go and it just sits there for a minute. Apparently, like they do that once they're back on Earth.
Several times and
Yeah,
break things.
they forget that like
Oopsie.
that apple's not going to float next to them.
Uh-huh.
Fun fact of the day.
I love it. Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thinking Sideways is not supported by Defeating the Huns. Instead, it's supported by the generous donations of our listeners on Patreon. Visit patreon.com/thinkingsideways to learn more. And thanks.
Thinking Sideways.
I don't understand.
Does not compute.
You never know.
Insufficient data to formulate a reply.
What?
Stories of things we simply don't know the answer to.
Hey, and welcome again to another episode of Thinking Sideways. I am Steve, of course, joined by,
Devin.
Joe.
and once again, we have a mystery.
We have several mysteries.
We actually have several mysteries.
Yeah, it's that time again.
It is where we do what do we call these? They're a group show,
Kinda.
Kinda like
series of
that.
shorts. I never can remember because we
Yeah.
do them infrequently. I never remember.
I don't know. It doesn't really matter.
We have
All right.
2 different kinds of group shows, right?
We do.
This kind,
We do.
and we do the we just have
This
huge
week,
mystery.
the kind of group show we're doing is where each of us has a small mystery,
Yeah.
and they're all kind of related.
on theme.
There's a theme, and the
There.
theme is lost treasures.
And there's a lot of lost treasure out there, by the way.
There is.
And so we're unfortunately just going to cover 3 treasures.
Shall we just go ahead and jump into this?
Yeah, let's just
Yeah,
do
let's
it.
talk about some lost treasure
All
here.
right. All right. Well, I guess I'll start.
Yeah.
All
Why
right,
don't you
please
start?
do.
Okay.
What are we talking? What are you talking about?
Well, I am going to be talking about the supposed lost galleon of pearls in the Salton Sea.
A lost galleon full of pearls.
Mm-hmm.
How many pearls?
A lot.
Like millions?
Lots.
Well,
do you know the worth of the pearls?
No.
Estimated? No, we don't know.
No. We don't.
It's
This
just a
story's
galleon
little-
full of pearls.
A little, it's a little thin. Here's the basic idea. If you don't know where the Salton Sea is, that's probably something you should know right away.
yeah.
It's in Southern California. It's near the Mexico-California border. It's also right there, not too far away from the coast.
Mm-hmm.
And technically, it can connect to the Gulf of California.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
it's that weird little spur that
Yeah, there's-
comes off
there's-
the edge of the continent. That's right where it's at.
Yeah, yeah. So, and then that little area sort of maybe theoretically floods.
and
Yeah.
and so just so we're clear, a galleon
Is this big Spanish ship.
okay.
They're the big,
1600s
Yeah.
era ships.
I don't know why. Isn't there a coin that was called a galleon? Some kind of coin that was called a galleon at one point? No? Am I making that up? Is that a fantasy thing? It's probably a fantasy
Might
thing.
be a fantasy thing,
Yeah,
but I
yeah.
think there is a coin that has a similar name. But
Okay.
anyway,
and
Sorry.
there are such things as like a galleon of gas and a galleon of whiskey.
Yeah, the galleon of whiskey I'm very familiar with.
Oh, yeah, me too. Yeah.
Okay, sorry. I just wanted to clarify
That's
that.
all right.
Too.
So let's get into the story. The story is that evidently in the 1800s there were a lot of people flooding across the country, and these people were coming through the California area. We've got things like the gold rush going on, so everybody's just milling about, and all of these stories started cropping up of the ship in the desert. So it's actually in the desert. It's not in the water. What are you laughing at?
I looked it up. It's Harry Potter. It's the currency in Harry Potter, isn't it? I was just laughing at the fact that, of course, I made a Harry Potter reference without even realizing.
Got it.
Harry Potter.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
It's all right.
Sorry.
Back to the story
there's
of
a
not
galleon.
Harry Potter.
So somebody finds
Sorry.
a galleon.
Yeah.
So all these people say they see the galleon.
Did anybody take a picture of it with their cell phone?
No.
Ah,
No.
lazy
They had
jerks.
the
No.
flip phones that had the terrible cameras
Oh, yeah.
in the 1800s. So according to some research out there, in the early 1600s, King Philip of Spain, I think Philip III, was going around and hunting for pearls.
Yeah,
So they're
always
doing it on the
possible.
coastline.
That was kind of the thing with the Spanish Empire is like they besides running Mexico,
Yep.
they also took over the Philippines, and they plundered all the gold out of the Philippines and brought it back to Spain via Mexico. And so speaking of Spanish galleons, there is actually a Spanish galleon buried in the sea or buried on the beach at Manzanita.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, there is.
yeah. That's
Yeah.
what the Goonies was about.
Yeah,
I think it is.
I think, no, it is.
it's
Don't look at me like that. I know it is.
no, but it actually exists.
Yeah.
it is really there.
Just probably
It
not
was-
full of stuff.
Yeah, that's the whole thing. It was there was a storm in the 1930s, and it was partially uncovered, and people became aware of it, and there was no money to actually dig it out, and so it's
Of course.
it's still there, and who knows what's in it? There might be all kinds of gold in there,
There might be treasure.
but yeah, there are Spanish galleons all over the place.
There are.
There were a lot of them out there, so this one could be for real.
Well,
Although I
and-
doubt that it was full of pearls.
Well, here's the thing: is that according to the story, the king orders these ships in 1610 is the year. Now that I'm rereading my notes, and he hires a couple of guys, and one of them is a gentleman by the name of Juan de Itubre and Pedro de Rosales. He sends them off in 3 ships that have a bunch of pearl divers on them. They go up and down the coast of California and Mexico. They're diving for pearls. They're evidently getting huge hauls. And eventually they meet the natives, and it turns out the natives had been taking pearls because pearls are in oysters. I suddenly couldn't think of what they were in. Sorry, pause.
Yeah.
And they just thought they were useless, so they were throwing them on the ground, and they had piles and piles of these things around.
Well, actually,
Well, technically, they are.
they are really useless. Yes.
They're just pretty.
They
Yeah.
have no value to them.
Yeah.
As
Yeah.
they don't, it's only because we say they have value now that they have value.
Just like diamonds.
Yeah.
Although I'm actually kind of surprised that they saw them that way, because don't forget that we bought Manhattan for a bunch of little trinkets and
Yeah.
and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of surprised that they just discarded them.
Well, yeah, I don't know. But
But
what
I
I
agree.
do know is that according to the story, they decided to trade for all these pearls, and what they did is they swindled the natives.
Shocking.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
they gave them rags and junk and all of
Doesn't
this.
sound like history at all.
No,
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 no.
not at all.
But actually, from the natives' perspective, they probably actually got a good deal, because a rag is something you can actually mop up a mess with, whereas you can't do that with a pearl.
True.
Yeah.
But they didn't take kindly to this, and they attacked the Spanish because they figured out they had been swindled. And a bunch of them were injured, and they ran. And a bunch of these guys said, "Hey, we need to go home. We need to go back to Spain." According to the story, though, the guy that was in charge of this, his name was Alvarez Cordon. He said, "No, we're going to continue on. I've been injured. I don't care. Go up the Gulf and keep looking for more pearls." So they do that. Well, eventually one of the ships hits a reef. It goes down. So now we've only got 2 ships. And they keep going on, and they continue up what is now the Gulf of California. They get into this weird inland sea. They're hanging about, and they realize that this place isn't what we need to be, and they want to go back down the Gulf.
Yeah.
Except the water level has dropped, and they realize that they can't get out, and the sea is sinking around their ship.
Yeah, I could see that happening. You know, Southern California, depending on the time of the year, it actually gets a lot of rain, like in January. Mm-hmm. And I could see where it could actually be navigable for a short period of time.
Well, here's what happens, though, and this is where we get into a little bit of local information. So, the Colorado River, you may or may not know this, and a lot of people probably don't because it's so drained at this point, but it used to run almost all the way to the Gulf of California. And this area that we're talking about where the Salton Sea is, it's actually used to be referred to as the Salton Sink. Because what would happen is the river would flood, it would overflow, and it would overflow into the sink. Makes sense. Mm-hmm. So if there's a big flood, lots of water comes in and it fills this area, and it's a temporary lake. At the same time, there are things called tidal bores, which from the Gulf of California push water up the estuaries, and it could, at times when there was a high flood, connect the sink to the ocean.
Oh.
So technically, it's possible.
Theoretically,
it's possible.
Theoretically,
I shouldn't have said technically. Theoretically, it's possible.
Unlikely.
Now, I would say that really, considering how torrential the range can be in Southern California, if you had those two things coinciding, it's maybe. Yeah. Otherwise,
well,
any other time of the year,
it's a maybe. It could.
It's a big old
happened.
maybe.
So
I would say that would be a distinct error of judgment on their part. But maybe, yeah.
Well, yeah. So according to this, what happens is the Spanish, evidently it was only one of the ships had gone while the other one stayed in the Gulf. This one went north and got stranded. The sailors realize they're in trouble. They leave the ship. It's sitting on the ground full of pearls, and they hike it through the desert back to the coast. And according to legend, are eventually picked up by another ship 2 months later.
So they didn't take the pearls with them?
No.
Any of them.
Well, they might have taken some with them.
But not all of them.
According to the legend, the hold was full of pearls.
Just imagine, like, taking a bath in that.
Yeah,
totally.
That would be pretty awesome. Yeah. That's a lot of pearls.
It is. It really is. And there are variants of this story. There's variants that say that no, it wasn't a Spanish galleon, but instead it was a pirate ship that went up and got caught in this same situation. So it's actually not a ship of pearls. It's a ship full of gold.
Yeah.
So that's another one. There's another version that says that no, it wasn't the Spanish and it wasn't gold. Instead, it was Vikings. That it's a Viking ship.
Yeah, okay, I'll buy that.
Which actually makes more sense when you think about it, because of those Viking ships. I can't remember what the name is, but they had a shallow draft to them.
Yeah.
So they go in much shallower water.
Yeah, the galleons do kind of draw a little bit of water.
They go really deep. So this actually is a little more credible from that approach that it could have been. But then again, those ships are a little bit smaller, and the legend says that people would see this giant ship in the sand without its mast, but it's still a giant ship that they could see from afar. And that's where we're going to move into the legend, because now we've talked about possibly how it could have got there. We now have all of these stories in the 1800s that happen. People saying they see the ship sitting there in the desert as they're crossing the desert, but they can never get back to it. There's a story of a prospector who gets into town, says he took shelter in this weird roundish wooden structure he found, and he hid in a storm in it. Unbeknownst to him, it was full of pearls.
If you'd only bothered to look around a little bit.
Yeah.
So now, is this thing just sitting on the desert floor, or is it partially buried?
Well, according to what happened in the area, and this is the hard part, is that of course the Salton Sea has now got water in it. We've pumped a bunch of water into it from runoff, from irrigation, and it's actually one of the saltiest bodies of water on the planet.
Why they call it the Salton Sea, I guess.
Not exactly. But no, the thing is that according to the stories, what's happened is it got stranded, and this is a desert, so sand blows around. And what does sand do to a big hulking object in the desert?
It piles up against
It
it.
piles up against it.
Yeah.
So it would be buried, and then it would get uncovered by the winds, and then a dune would grow around it, and then it would get uncovered by the winds and the water. So it's coming and going. There's the story. It evolved. Like I mean, we talked about it. First it started with a ship of pearls, then it was a ship full of gold, then it was a Viking ship. Like there's all these versions.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually rolled on from there. It's actually become a ghost ship that sails on the sands of the Salton Sea.
So people actually report seeing it sailing around
This
that.
bleached ship without mast flying around the sea.
Yeah, yeah.
Or the sands, I should say.
Yeah, I'll buy that.
It's a phantom ship.
Why don't they just drain the Salton Sea and